had been carefully saving for years, scraping, planning, and putting every extra cent aside until the total reached $60,000. That wedding fund wasn't just money in a bank account. It was a symbol of every late night Mark and I had worked, every vacation we skipped, every indulgence we turned down. It was the promise of a celebration we could finally afford on our own terms, without depending on anyone else. And deep down, I had believed my parents, Richard and Diane, respected that effort. That Sunday, everything seemed normal. We gathered around the polished oak table in my parents' dining room, the familiar smell of roast chicken and garlic butter filling the air. The conversation flowed easily at first. Small updates about Mark's job, Emily's latest social media collaboration, the weather. Nothing in the rhythm of the evening hinted at the tidal wave that was about to hit. Mom sat across from me, her blonde bob perfectly styled, her wine glass catching the light. She wore the same serene smile she always put on when she was about to deliver some grand statement. And then, between passing the mashed potatoes and topping off Dad's glass, she said it as if it were nothing more significant than a change in the dessert menu. "We used your wedding fund to help Emily buy her dream house. You should be proud. You've given your sister the start she deserves." The words landed with such casual precision that for a second, I thought I had misheard her. My fork slipped in my fingers, clattering against the plate and smearing gravy across the chicken breast I hadn't yet touched. Across the table, Emily beamed. Her green eyes sparkled like a child unwrapping presents on Christmas morning, her manicured nails tapping the table with nervous excitement, completely oblivious to the devastation scorching through my chest. A ringing filled my ears, drowning out the clinking of silverware and the sound of my father clearing his throat. It wasn't just the money. It was the theft of trust. I had protected that fund like it was sacred, because it was meant to be the foundation of a new life for me and Mark. Every deposit was a step toward independence, a future that belonged to us. And now, without warning, my parents had dismantled it in one fell swoop, handed it over to my younger sister like a gift wrapped in entitlement. "Excuse me." My voice cracked, breaking the silence I didn't realize had stretched across the table. My hands felt clammy against the edge of the plate. Mom didn't even flinch. She dabbed her lips with a napkin and said, in that calm, almost patronizing tone she reserved for justifying her choices, "Emily needed help, sweetheart. Houses in her neighborhood don't come on the market often, and this one was perfect. She wouldn't have gotten it without us stepping in quickly. Your father and I agreed it was the right thing to do." Dad gave a single nod, the kind that was meant to end the conversation before it could start. He looked at me as though my shock was the problem, not what had been done. Emily leaned in, her voice bubbling with excitement. "It's everything I dreamed of. White shutters, a big backyard, even a sunroom for my content shoots. You'll have to come see it once I move in. Honestly, I still can't believe how lucky I am." Lucky. That word twisted inside me. She wasn't lucky. She was entitled, shielded, spoiled. And my parents had made it happen at my expense. Mark, sitting stiffly beside me, glanced at me with wide eyes. His hand tightened around mine under the table, grounding me. But his jaw was clenched so tightly I could feel the tremor in his fingers. He didn't say anything yet. He knew this was a storm that belonged first to me. My chest burned as I looked around the table, searching for even a flicker of recognition of what had just been taken from me. But all I saw was Emily's delight, Mom's self-satisfaction, and Dad's thinly veiled impatience. It was as though I should have been applauding, not reeling from betrayal. The details kept pressing into me, sharp and cold. The fund had been in my name, earmarked specifically for my wedding. How had they even accessed it? Mom must have used her lingering connection as co-signer from when I opened the account in college. Back when she insisted it was safer this way, I had never thought twice about it. I never imagined she would use that access to strip me of what was mine. Why would you think that's okay? I finally managed, though my voice shook. I wasn't even sure if I wanted an answer or if I just needed them to hear the depth of the betrayal. Mom tilted her head, as though I were a child throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. Because we're a family. Family sacrifices for one another. And you'll understand someday, when you have children of your own, that sometimes the right decision doesn't make everyone happy. But Emily, she needed this. You'll manage without it. The way she said it, dismissive, confident, ignited something cold and sharp in me. But the anger hadn't yet found its full form. For now, it was still disbelief, shock heavy in my throat, words dying before they could take shape. Across from me, Emily took a delicate sip of wine. Her shoulders relaxed in a way that said she had no idea what it meant to work for something, to scrape and save, to build toward a dream dollar by dollar. She thought this was her victory. She thought I would smile, maybe even congratulate her. But all I could do was stare, the fork forgotten, my meal congealing on the plate, while the future I had planned for years crumbled silently in front of me. The silence that followed my mother's announcement was so heavy, it seemed to press against my skin. My fork still rested in the puddle of gravy, untouched. I expected, hoped, that someone at the table might realize the weight of what had just been said. Instead, Dad leaned back in his chair, clearing his throat as if preparing for a lecture, the same way he used to when I brought home a grade he thought was less than perfect. His voice carried that steady, no-nonsense tone that had always ended arguments before they began. "Look," he said, gesturing with one hand as though laying out irrefutable logic, "your sister is the baby of the family. You know how hard she's worked to make something of herself. She's put in long hours building her platform, and people think being an influencer is easy. But it's not. Emily has earned this opportunity, and without quick action, she would have lost that house. That's why we stepped in. It wasn't theft. It was family duty." Family duty. The phrase rang in my head like a cruel joke. For years, I had understood duty as sacrifice, sitting through double shifts, driving an old car long past its prime, turning down luxuries to build that fund. But in his mouth, duty meant one-sided obligation, a command that I surrender without question for the sake of my sister's comfort. Mom placed her hand over Dad's, as if reinforcing his words with her presence. Her expression softened, the way it often did when she wanted to smooth the edges of his bluntness. "Sweetheart, you and Mark are solid. You've both got jobs, savings, stability. You'll figure things out. You always do. But Emily doesn't have that kind of safety net. She's under pressure every day, competing in a tough industry. We couldn't let her lose the chance to own a home in a neighborhood that's perfect for her work." Her voice dripped with reassurance, but every syllable carried an unspoken accusation. That my disappointment was selfish. That my protest was an obstacle to the family's collective good. She smiled at me as though she expected me to feel honored, as if my loss was a badge of nobility. And then came the worst cut. Emily pushed back her chair and came around the table, her perfume trailing in a sugary cloud, her arms stretching toward me. She wrapped me in a hug so light and self-satisfied it felt more like possession than affection. "You'll thank us when you see how happy I am," she whispered into my ear, her tone oblivious, almost chirpy, as though she were sharing good gossip rather than gloating over what had been taken from me. Her words rattled in my skull. Thank them for draining the years of sacrifice Mark and I had endured, for stripping away the independence we fought for. She pulled back, her face shining with gratitude. Gratitude directed not at me, but at the parents who had shifted my dreams into her lap, as though I were nothing more than a stepping stone. I wanted to scream, to tell her that happiness built on someone else's sacrifice wasn't happiness at all. It was entitlement. But the scream caught in my chest, lodged like a stone. I sat frozen, my tongue heavy, my pulse loud in my ears. Dad leaned forward, seizing on my silence as if it meant agreement. See? Deep down you understand. Families support each other. You'll get married someday, and we'll be there for you too. But right now, Emily needed this more. I stared at him, my mouth opening slightly before closing again. Support? When had support ever looked like betrayal? Mom nodded, her hand still resting over Dad's. You're stronger than she is, honey. You've always been more grounded. This was the right call. You'll see that in time. The words cut deeper than I could have anticipated. Stronger. Grounded. Words meant to console, yet they landed like condemnation, branding me as the one expected to endure without complaint, to bear the cost for the so-called baby of the family. Emily, who had never once been denied anything, who had always been shielded from consequences, was once again placed at the center of the universe, while I was told to orbit quietly around her. Emily returned to her chair, sipping from her glass, her smile smug and serene. She didn't even sense the gulf she had widened between us. To her, this was natural, justified, even deserved. I sat back, numbness spreading like frost through my veins. The sharp anger that had first risen gave way to something duller, heavier. It was a suffocating mixture of disbelief and resignation, a cold realization that the people who should have protected my trust had instead dismantled it, all while speaking in tones of love and duty. Mark's hand squeezed mine again under the table, but even his strength couldn't pierce the fog pressing down on me. I looked at the three of them, my parents with their calm righteousness, my sister glowing with unearned joy, and I understood, with a clarity I wished I didn't have, that in their eyes, my sacrifice wasn't a tragedy, it was a necessity. And they expected me to wear it as a badge of honor. The numbness burned off like fog under a hard sun. By morning, it had hardened into something with edges, clean, cold, and sharp enough to cut through every polite instinct I'd been taught. I didn't eat. I didn't check emails. I printed the last 2 months of bank statements and slid them into a folder, the pages still warm. Mark asked if I wanted him there. I said yes, because I didn't trust my voice not to shake, and I wanted them to see what solidarity looked like when it wasn't a slogan. We drove in silence, except for the turn signal ticking like a metronome for a speech I hadn't rehearsed but already knew by heart. My parents' kitchen was bright with winter light, stainless steel and quartz gleaming as though a showroom could absolve anything. The coffee machine sputtered and hissed. Mom stood beside it in a cardigan the color of oatmeal, looking as if she'd slept fine. Dad sat at the breakfast bar with his tablet, glasses low on his nose. Emily was there too, scrolling her phone, a high ponytail bouncing each time she laughed at something only she could see. No one looked up right away. I had the absurd thought that maybe I was invisible until I spoke. That money was mine, I said, setting the folder on the counter with a soft smack. You had no right. I needed that for my future. The words were simple, but they rang like a struck bell. Mom's hand froze over the mug. Dad's eyes lifted, slow, controlled, an old general calculating a battlefield. Emily's lips curled in a reflexive smile that faltered when she realized this wasn't a joke. Dad was first to speak, and he didn't bother with a preamble. His face tightened, fine lines bracketing his mouth, as if my sentence had personally insulted his jaw. Selfish, he said, the syllables flat as a gavel. After all we've done for you, you can't even be happy for your sister? Anger moved in me with purpose. I opened the folder, slid the top statement toward him with a finger that didn't tremble. After all you've done to me, you mean? You had access because you insisted on it when I was 20. You told me it was about safety. You used that access to empty the account without asking. That isn't family. That's trespass dressed up as virtue. Mom stepped between us with an apologetic smile that had resolved 1,000 minor conflicts in this house. Sweetheart, let's not turn this into a legal seminar. We did what we had to do for the family. You and Mark are stable. You'll be fine. Emily needed a quick decision or she'd lose the house. Timing matters. Timing, I repeated, tasting the word like something sour. You mean I wasn't meant to find out until after the papers were signed and the ribbon was cut on her sunroom? Emily set her phone down with the theatrical patience of someone who believes interruption is a hate crime. You don't even need a big wedding, she said, voice glazed with advice she'd never take. Just elope. Be practical. There it was, the entitled verdict, lacquered with reasonableness. A heat rose in my neck so fast, I thought I might be flushing from collarbone to scalp. Be practical, I said softly, and the softness made Mom blink. Practical like spending someone else's money on a dream you couldn't afford. Practical like calling theft duty and narcissism need. Dad's tablet closed with a clap. Watch your tone, he warned, that old paternal thundercloud forming. You've had plenty from us over the years. We're not your enemies. Your sister is building something real here. A home, a business. Do you have any idea what her audience expects? The location? The aesthetic? The props? I cut in. The life you curated for her by cutting into mine. Mark's hand found the small of my back, an anchor without words. He didn't try to speak for me. He didn't need to. Mom tried a different register. Gentle voice, palms open. We're saying you're resilient. You always land on your feet. Emily. She glanced toward my sister, then back to me with a sigh that implied a secret report only parents receive. Emily doesn't. Not like you. She's the baby. The baby is 27, I said. And she has 2 brand deals for kitchen mixers that cost more than my car insurance. If she wants a house for her brand, she can negotiate, save, or choose a different zip code like the rest of us. Emily rolled her eyes, ponytail swinging. This jealousy is not a good look. My followers can tell when energy is toxic and enough, I said, surprising myself with the iron in it. The kitchen seemed to narrow around the word. Dad leaned forward, elbows on quartz, forearms like a barrier. We made a judgment call. That's what parents do. We allocate resources where they have the most impact. You'll have your day. Right now, your sister needed a boost. A boost? I echoed, then tapped the statement's final balance. Zeros in a thin black font that looked almost polite about the obliteration. You didn't boost her. You amputated me. Something like a flinch crossed Mom's face before she smoothed it away. That's dramatic. What's dramatic is pretending love requires silence when harm is done, I said. My voice had settled into a steadiness I recognized from meetings where I had to deliver news that wouldn't land softly. What's dramatic is calling me selfish for guarding the boundary you crossed. I built that fund with years of restraint you celebrated, until it benefited you to pretend it was communal. Emily laughed. A quick, high exhale. This is exhausting. You're making a scene over a party budget. My head turned toward her so fast the room tipped for a heartbeat. It wasn't for a party, I said. It was for dignity. For not starting a marriage in debt. For knowing we could invite people we love and feed them without calculating if the napkins cost a week of groceries. She shrugged. Then don't invite so many people. Mark inhaled, sharp enough to be audible. Dad seized on it. See? Compromise. That's adulthood. We've modeled that your whole life. What you've modeled, I said, is that Emily's desires are emergencies and my plans are elastic. The words hovered, true enough to sting even in the echo. Mom fussed with the coffee maker, pressing the silver lever twice as if the machine might redeem the moment with a cappuccino. We did not steal from you, she said. We prioritized. You can rebuild. And when you do, you'll thank us for helping your sister when it mattered. It was almost elegant, the symmetry of their framing. Theft as treason, violation as love. I looked at each of them in turn, letting the silence do what my voice could not, lay the scene bare. Dad, stern behind his righteousness. Mom, tranquil as a pond that hides a tangle of weeds. Emily, glossy and incurious, already bored by a moral vocabulary that offered no discount code. I picked up the statement again, folded it cleanly along the crease, slid it back into the folder. The act steadied me more than any breath could. Listen carefully, I said. I am not a resource to be reallocated. I am not a stable one whose stability you get to spend. That money was my labor converted into a future. You siphoned it because you could, then wrapped it in scripture about family. Don't mistake my composure for consent. Dad's mouth thinned. You're being ungrateful. For what? I asked. The lesson? Emily's phone buzzed. She checked it reflexively, then looked up with that bright, empty confidence influencers wear like sunscreen. You're going to feel so much better once you see how happy I am, she said, parroting last night's line, like a tagline. It'll all make sense. Something in me locked into place, like a gear finally finding the right tooth. I felt the clarity land, heavy and precise. It already makes sense, I said, just not the way you think. Mom reached for me then, the old choreography, hands warm, eyes glistening, tone softened by decades of practice. Honey, don't, I said, stepping back. The word wasn't loud, but it carried. Across the island, Dad's contempt flashed and faded into a cool appraisal, the kind he saved for stubborn subordinates. Emily crossed her arms, chin lifted, already composing the story where she was the misunderstood heroine of a family drama with flawless lighting. That was the breaking point, I said, looking at each of them, feeling the sentence as a line drawn across tile and time. I will never forgive you for this betrayal. In the days after that confrontation, my world didn't fall apart with the drama of a storm. It fractured quietly, like ice cracking under steady pressure. Mark stood with me through all of it, a silent wall of anger and loyalty, his hand firm on my back whenever my voice faltered. He didn't try to soften the blow or talk me out of my rage. He let me feel it fully, and that was a gift. But outside of our apartment, the response was very different. The extended family whispered like a flock of doves startled into flight, but unwilling to leave the ground. My aunts, with their practiced tones of diplomacy, called to check in only to circle the same refrain. Keep the peace, sweetheart. Families go through things. Don't make this bigger than it has to be. My uncles avoided direct judgment, but spoke of duty, as though my silence would magically stitch the wound my parents had torn open. None of them said outright that what had been done was fair, yet every word bent toward a plea for harmony at any cost. It didn't take long before the picture my parents painted spread like wildfire. In their version, I was not a betrayed daughter, but an ungrateful one. They told anyone who would listen that I had chosen money over love, a bank balance over blood. Mom's words, spoken with her talent for soft cruelty, were repeated to me almost verbatim by relatives. She's always been the strong one. We thought she'd be proud to help her sister. We didn't realize she was so selfish. I heard the echo of their story at a family gathering I almost didn't attend. The air was thick with the false cheer that fills a room when everyone knows a secret but refuses to speak it aloud. Emily moved through the crowd glowing with her new homeowner's aura, fielding compliments about the house she hadn't even moved into yet. When people glanced at me, I could see it in their eyes. The question of why I couldn't just smile and clap along. I felt like a villain crashing her own narrative, a shadow in the corner of a story that was supposed to be triumphant. The isolation stung in a way that surprised me. I had always thought of myself as independent, someone who didn't crave validation from the chorus of cousins and aunts. But watching them line up behind my parents' version of events, each choosing the comfort of a neat family story over the messy truth, made me feel erased. My voice had been reduced to background noise against the symphony of their excuses. Mark tried to counterbalance it. At night, when I replayed the conversations in my head until sleep became impossible, he reminded me that I wasn't wrong. You earned that money, he'd say, his jaw tight with controlled fury. They had no right. Don't let them rewrite this. His certainty was a lifeline, but even his conviction couldn't always drown out the gnawing doubt. When everyone else treats you like the villain, it's easy to wonder if the costume fits. I withdrew first in small ways. I stopped answering my mother's daily calls, her voicemails chirping about forgiveness and family unity, while ignoring the theft at the heart of it all. I let my father's texts pile up, short, clipped messages demanding that I be reasonable and stop this nonsense. Even Emily reached out once, her message a mixture of folks' concern and smug victory. We can still be close, you know. Don't ruin this over something you'll forget about once you see the house. I didn't reply. The silence wasn't easy. Every ignored call left me raw, like I had abandoned the duty drilled into me since childhood. Answer, respect, obey. But with each day that passed, the quiet became less suffocating and more protective, a barrier between their version of me and the person I knew myself to be. Mark and I sat down one evening, the apartment lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp, and faced the reality of our situation. The wedding we had imagined, with the wide guest list, the catered meal, the music that would carry into the night, wasn't possible anymore. Not without the fund. The thought of scaling it back hurt, like admitting defeat, but as we talked through it, something steadier began to form. We'll rebuild, Mark said, his tone not tentative but resolute. It won't be the wedding we pictured, but it'll be ours. No strings, no one holding it over us. The words settled into me with a warmth that surprised me. For the first time since the dinner, I felt the faint outline of control returning. Our wedding wouldn't be the glossy spectacle I had once saved for, but maybe it didn't need to be. Maybe the act of building again, on our own terms, free of debts to anyone but ourselves, was a kind of victory. I looked at him, his eyes steady, his hand reaching across the table for mine, and I realized that while my family had turned me into the villain of their story, I didn't have to accept the role. I could choose a different narrative, one written in the silence I carved out for myself, and in the determination to stand on ground they could no longer claim. And even though the isolation burned, even though the whispers cut, I held my ground. Because losing $60,000 had taught me something more valuable than I wanted to admit. The cost of peace, when it demands your dignity, is far greater than the cost of standing alone. It was 4 days after I had cut off their calls when my phone lit up with my father's name. I was at my desk, half immersed in spreadsheets, the kind of quiet, routine work that kept my thoughts from straying too much toward the rawness of the last week. The phone buzzed insistently, his name burning across the screen like a flare. Against my better judgment, I answered. The explosion came immediately. "What did you do?" Dad's voice was thunderous, breaking through the receiver with a fury so sharp it made my coworkers glance over. "Our bank account is frozen. We can't access anything." I sat up straighter, the pen in my hand slipping from my fingers. My first instinct was confusion. What could I possibly have done to freeze their accounts? I hadn't touched their money, hadn't so much as stepped foot in their financial world outside of what they had stolen from mine. But then, as the edges of his words sank in, calm began to spread over me. The kind of cold clarity that comes not from fear, but from recognition. Something had happened, something they couldn't control. "Dad," I said slowly, deliberately, keeping my voice level. "What are you talking about?" "You know damn well what I'm talking about," he spat. "Don't play games with me. We can't pay bills, can't pull cash. Nothing. The bank says it's under investigation." His breathing was ragged, his anger pulsing through the line like static. I let him rage while my mind spun, piecing together fragments. Investigation. Frozen. Under review. It didn't take long to land on the truth. My parents, so proud of their financial acumen, had bragged often about their investment partner, a man named Carl who always seemed to offer them opportunities just a little too good to be true. They spoke of him like a wizard, capable of turning ordinary savings into rivers of returns. I remembered the way they waved off questions about risk, dismissing anyone who doubted him as too cautious to get ahead. Now the house of cards had collapsed. I asked, almost clinically, "Is this about Carl?" The silence on the other end was damning. Then came a growl, low and vicious. "Don't you dare say his name like that. He's under investigation, but this will blow over. It has to. They can't just." "They can." I interrupted, my voice steadier than I thought possible. "If he was running fraud, if his accounts are being seized, then anything connected to him is under review, including yours." My father's fury flared again. "This is your fault. Somehow you." But I didn't need to hear the rest. His accusations, wild and desperate, were nothing more than smoke from the fire they had set themselves. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a moment, staring at the glowing screen, listening not with dread, but with a strange, rising satisfaction. For the first time in years, the power wasn't in his hands. The irony struck hard and sweet. 4 days ago, I had been the one stripped of savings, told to smile while my future was handed away. Now here he was, the man who had justified betrayal in the name of family, begging for control over what he no longer had. The symmetry was almost too sharp to believe. "Dad," I said finally, bringing the phone back to my ear. "I didn't do anything. This isn't me. It's you. It's the choices you made, the people you trusted. Don't put this on me." His response dissolved into a string of curses, accusations about loyalty, about how a daughter should stand by her family in times of crisis. I let him rant, each word only tightening the knot of satisfaction in my chest. Because beneath the anger, I could hear it. Fear. For once, the man who had always spoken with authority, who always believed himself untouchable, was rattled. I imagined them at home. Mom wringing her hands, Emily pacing in outrage that her mortgage payments might be tangled in the freeze. I pictured the panic, the frantic calls to bankers and lawyers, the dawning realization that their safety net had evaporated. And in that mental image, I felt no pity, only justice. Karma had not only arrived, it had knocked loudly, dressed in the same cold finality with which they had drained my fund. Their righteous sermons about family duty had crumbled under the weight of their own greed. They had funneled my money, my sacrifice, into a scheme built on sand, and now the tide was sweeping it all away. The fury I had carried for days didn't flare hotter at this news. It shifted, cooled, and condensed into something harder. Satisfaction, yes, but colder than joy, sharper than relief. It was the kind of satisfaction that came not from revenge, but from the universe revealing, with undeniable clarity, that I hadn't been wrong. That betrayal had consequences. That arrogance had limits. Dad's voice eventually thinned into desperate demands. "You have to help us. You and Mark, pull some of your savings, cover us until this clears. This is temporary." The loss didn't feel like an open wound. It felt accounted for, not repaid. Nothing had returned, but balanced in the ledger by something that mattered more. The end of a story in which my parents were the arbiters of right and mine was the voice expected to bend. I understood then that liberation often looks nothing like victory. There were no trumpets, no applause, no grand apology to crown the moment. There was only the end of permission. Permission to define my generosity without my consent. Permission to call harm by a prettier name. Permission to treat my stability as a fund they could spend. Freedom arrived not as acquisition, but as subtraction. The removal of their hand from my pocket, their narration from my choices, their gravity from my orbit. On the coffee table lay the folder of bank statements, its corner bent from being opened and closed too many times. I slid it into the drawer and shut it, not as denial, but as punctuation. What needed to be seen had been seen. What needed to be said had been said. I would not reread the numbers tonight, will them to change, or braid them into new hypotheticals. There's a kind of dignity in letting a page be a page. Mark leaned his head back against the couch and looked over at me. In the lamplight, his eyes were soft, not with pity, but with covenant, an unadorned promise that whatever our life looked like, we would build it without borrowed definitions. The laughter that followed wasn't about ease. Nothing had become easy. It was about alignment. The world had tilted, and for once it had tilted toward the truth. My parents were not untouchable. Their self-mythology, two benevolent strategists managing a family like a portfolio, distributing resources for the common good, had collapsed under the smallest test of consequence. They could still deny wrongdoing. They could still campaign for sympathy. But the spell was broken for me. The illusion that they had ever valued fairness as anything more than a tool had lifted, and the floor beneath my feet, paradoxically, felt firmer without it. I turned my phone face up and switched it to Do Not Disturb, not with bitterness, but with care. A boundary holds best when it is tended to like any other living thing. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had texture, presence. I could hear the building's hallway hush, the distant elevator cables sigh, even the faint scrape of a neighbor's chair. Ordinary sounds. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed their company. My wedding fund was gone. That fact didn't become less true just because my parents were finally tasting consequence. But the more precious fiction was gone, too. The story in which fairness could be negotiated if I was accommodating enough, patient enough, loyal enough. Justice had not reimbursed me. It had restored proportion. And in that recalibration, in the simple act of telling the truth and refusing to finance my own erasure, something unclenched. We sat there a long time, saying little, letting the room learn our new silence. I rested my head on Mark's shoulder and felt the day's electricity drain out of my muscles, leaving a clean fatigue. When we finally did raise our plastic cups, it wasn't a toast. It was acknowledgement, a nod to a small, durable kind of peace that comes when you stop arguing with gravity. Somewhere beyond our window, the city moved and hummed, as indifferent to our story as time always is. Inside, the air was clear, the ledger was honest, and the space where permission used to be, filled now with nothing but our own names, felt, unmistakably, like freedom.